So now I will turn to my typical questions that I ask, just about everybody for my 13 horrifically silly days of Halloween. And we'll begin with, what is your favorite horror movie of all time and why?
Hey, I think my favorite horror movie is called Rigor Mortis or Guernsey, and this came out in 2013. So this was like a homage tribute to the hopping vampire movies in Hong Kong.
Yes. Okay.
So director Juno Mack, I think this is like one of the only movies he ever directed, really. But basically, it's about this actor, I guess a failed actor. He moves into this apartment and he kills himself, and he's rescued by someone in the apartment who happens to be an, I guess, an exorcist slash Taoist priest, whatever.
Okay.
So this guy rescues him, and it turns out, he's not even working as an exorcist anymore because he says there's no business. And and there's an older couple in the condo or apartment, and the guy dies. So the wife is so overwhelmed with grief, she approaches this exorcist for help, but then he was like, no, no, he's dead, you should let him go. So she finds like another guy who's a bit shifty, who said, of course I'll help you, raise him from the dead. And then something goes wrong, and then this her husband becomes a hopping vampire. So, and she ends up having to feed him, so like, and I think one of the most heartbreaking scenes was like, there's this child that's running around. Like he's sort of, his parents are there, but like he likes to run around and, bug the neighbors. And then he ends up there in the apartment. And then this old lady sort of feeds him to her husband. I think that was like, and then the kid becomes a ghost. And then when the mom comes looking for him, this ghost comes and she's like, why are you a ghost? And she's like so pissed. So she goes after the vampire. And but I don't know. But I mean, I really enjoyed it. It was very unpredictable in a way, because like you're sort of trying to figure out what's going to happen next. And because it's set in a modern day, it's not like, it's set in the past or anything. And none of them are like, I mean, other than the exorcist people, I mean, no one really knows what to do. Like if there's a hopping vampire, what do you do, right?
Yeah.
So everyone's just trying to survive. And and it was a really nice tribute to the old films, because the old films were all like not very serious. They were actually kind of misogynistic, what I mean? Like usually there's always, the females with the big boobs running around, and then of course, and you can only curb off the vampire with, I think it's like glutinous rice. So you can throw raw rice, and I believe you need to be a male version. And if you pee in a cup, you can throw your pee at them or something. Like it was very like, I don't know, very immature. But this one was actually quite well done. Like I wish he would do more. I thought that the way they executed it was very nice, and the scenery was, it was very creepy, but it was so believable. Like, I mean, I'm thinking, well, I mean, knock on wood, but I mean, like, if your spouse or significant other passed away, would you not want them? You know what I mean? Like, if you had a choice, would you bring them back? So it was really interesting to see that. So.
Very cool. All right. Well, what about your favorite horror novel or author of all time and why?
Which of all time, I would pick a Japanese author called Junji Ito. So he wrote Uzumaki. I don't know if you've heard of Uzumaki. So it's a Japanese horror manga series, and it's about a spiral. So basically, the spiral curse is in this town, and you can't. So I think they had reporters come in at one point, and once you're in the town, you can't escape it. So basically, it's about the spiral affecting people. And I've never been to this place in Japan where they have terrace houses where they're built like in long rows. Like I've never seen that in North America, anyways. But he was inspired by that apparently, and then weird things start happening, right? Like people start becoming snails, like a spiral, and like everything just, and they start running out of food, and then people that are still alive are like, should we eat the snails? And then but people are like, but they're people, right? And so so lots of terrible things happen pretty much, right? Because it's a horror manga. But it was just, I remember seeing, I think the first time I saw it was at Indigo, and I was just randomly, going through the bookshelves, and I picked it up, and one of the first scenes I saw was like someone going into the snail, and then he was like, "This tastes like sushi," and I was like, "Oh my god!" And then I was like, "Okay, I better read the rest," right? So, but
intriguing.
But I thought, this was very interesting, and and in a lot of the Asian horror, I mean, it's not, how do you say it? It's like events happen that you can't control, right? Like, I think in a lot of the American horror, it's usually, you know what I mean? It's like a person coming after you, you can stop them, right? But if it's like something like a spiral, like what the hell are you gonna do? Like it's a spiral, it's like a tornado coming, right?
Yeah. Very
Uh,
strange and cool.
so it's very, very strange. So I like really weird stories like that. So.
Yeah, that's good. Cool. Now, do you have a favorite Canadian horror movie?
Yes, I actually really like Ginger Snaps. I don't know if you.
Oh,
I really like the first one. Like I don't think I've
yes.
seen. You know, I think I saw the second one, but I just don't remember it as much as the first one as much. You know,
Me too.
like it made a deeper impression on me,
Hmm.
and I thought it was really cool. I mean, I know some people thought it was predictable in a way because of the whole period werewolf thing, but whatever. I thought it was really neat because I don't
Yeah,
think I've seen too many movies that would talk about that, right? Your menstrual cycle and all that stuff.
exactly.
And it was really nice to see like a platonic friendship between a guy and a girl. Like, you know what
Mhm.
I mean? Like he wasn't really a love interest, he was just
Yeah,
trying to help, right? So that was really nice because, half the time it doesn't work out anyways, right?
right.
And yeah, and seeing the two sisters like trying to deal and I mean, I really hated being a teenager. So I was just like, yes, I totally understand this anger and trying to wanting to like kill everybody. So,
Yeah, yeah,
but
absolutely.
yeah, so I thought that was quite well done. And I remember thinking, oh gosh, a lot of scenes are so dark, but I guess, that's all right because this is a horror movie anyway. So
Exactly. A lot of people think of it as a horror comedy too, which is totally valid and cool too. But yeah, it definitely, either whether you think of it as a horror or a horror comedy, it's a great movie and really great werewolf. I love the werewolf effects,
mm,
like the actual costume,
yeah,
etc.
yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, good choice. What about a Canadian horror or genre novel? Do you have a fave in that department?
I think it would be First Blast of the Trumpet Against the Monstrous Regiment of Women, and this is by a Canadian author called Eric McCormick. So he's actually from Scotland, and he taught English at University of Waterloo. But
Wow.
I think his stuff, I don't think it's necessarily classified as horror. It's more like gothic horror, I would think, because he writes so elegantly. It's a very elegant prose, and the way he describes things, even when like horrible, horrible things happen, it's just written so beautifully that you're like, "What? You mean this baby died?" And then you're like, "Wait a minute, like what happened?" And you know,
Yeah.
so this book was quite interesting because it was about this man who was born as a twin, but then the twin got crushed accidentally by the father, like the newborn girl. And
Mm.
then, he's lost and he goes on some journey and initially he's really frightened of women, like this fear of women, but then later on, it becomes better and he has all sorts of like weird images where he's like he makes a journey back to the womb, I guess. Like he feels like he's going backwards and it's just complicated, right? Like he has a survivor's guilt because he didn't die, his twin died, and it's all these different imageries. It's quite beautiful, but it's a very literary book, right? Like I know, like when I think about some of the horror I read, like Stephen King and the Clive Barker, is very plain. It's plain,
Yes.
direct. You know what I mean? And I think I write very plain, direct too.
Yeah.
But Eric McCormick stuff is very lyrical, I guess.
Okay.
Like sort of like a J.R. Tolkien kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like they
Yeah. Yeah.
on and then after I don't I can I mean I need energy to read those things. Because sometimes I get so tired these days and I'm just like, oh for Christ's sake, just tell me did they die or not? So
Yeah, I get that too. But it's nice to sprinkle a few of those in there every once in a while with the plain, more concise
yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, but he's
But
very, very nicely done. Like very gothic horror, I think I'd say. Yeah.
nice. All right. Well, we talked a little bit about Ginger Snaps being a horror comedy, but do you have
Mm.
any other fave horror comedies? If they happen to be Canadian, great.
Hmm.
But anything like that, either movies or books?
I can talk about a few. I mean, for
Sure.
movies, I actually just watched one last night called Sugar Street Studios, and came out yeah in 2021, and that's actually a Hong Kong movie,
Oh,
and it's a very cynical look at the Hong Kong film industry and
uh,
um, how like this slimy producer never has money to pay the special effects team.
mm,
So basically, there was this film studio where there was a murder, like there was a fire and people died, And so there was a slimy producer, and he wants to convert the studio into a haunted house, right, and charge for admission prices.
Right.
So he hired, the special effects team that he hasn't paid, but he was like, "I'll pay you, once the haunted house is up."
Sure.
And then people come, and they actually do meet a ghost, so they all freak out and they run away. But the special effects team is like, "We're here every day, and we don't see any ghosts." But then one day they do meet the ghost. And it turns out the ghost actually just wants to talk to people, but because she's all burned and she's a ghost, people freak out, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But basically, it's about like, these young people helping the ghost sort of, mm, how do you say it? Basically, they were murdered, right? So basically, the murderer, catching the murderer and
Okay.
making the
Yeah.
murderer pay
Yeah.
for what happened.
So they can be at rest, kind of thing.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
but when you see the poster, right, you see this horribly burnt person and it looks so scary, but when you actually watch it, it was actually quite funny to see it because they make a lot of jokes. And at one point, the producers at a Halloween party dressed as Snow White for some reason, and you're just like, all right, you know. So, but that was like a homage, I think, to the older comedy films. And also, it's out of Hong Kong, so it's a very sarcastic film. Like
Okay.
at one point, they're scaring people in the haunted house, right? Because they have all these cameras, and they're like, oh, we've become so mean. But they're like, maybe to survive, you have to be mean. Like, there's also all these weird philosophical things
Yeah.
scattered throughout the movie, which I thought was quite interesting. And they were also saying, like there isn't, because the producers like horror is a good place to do a movie because there's a lot of change in Asia right now, which so China, a lot of Chinese studios won't support horror movies because it's not seen as being good for society.
Mhm.
So, but in Hong Kong, because if you have a small budget, you can do it in Hong Kong, where supposedly it's still more demographic for now,
Right.
anyways, right? So,
One hopes.
so
You
it's
know, yeah.
interesting.
You hold out.
But for Canadian comedy, I actually like Fido. I don't
Oh
know if you've
yes.
seen that. So I mean, that's that was really well done for such a
Mhm.
small film.
Yes.
And it was just cute. I mean, I don't know what else
Yeah.
to say. It was just so cute. So that was a good
Zombies.
movie.
Yeah.
Good movie to watch.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know if you've heard of a Japanese one called The Happiness of the Katakuris.
I don't think so. No.
So this one is a Japanese musical comedy,
Oh.
and I watched it because Takashi Miike was the director. So he does a lot of like violent horror movies, I guess. And it's loosely based on a Korean film called The Quiet Family. So it's about this family. They buy I guess it's like an inn. So guests come and they stay at the inn, but the only people that come like are all like one person kills themselves, another person ends up for some reason accidentally, well, okay, not accidentally, but I mean, for some reason, this cheerleader and the sumo wrestler in a room together, and then he crushes her to death because he has a heart attack when they're,
Oh, and
doing stuff.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then so all these people end up dying, but then they don't want to ruin the reputation of in, so they end up burying these people, and the people become zombies, and then they come up and they do singing and dancing, and it's just the most bizarre. It's very bizarre, but it's I don't know, for some reason it's just really really funny.
Oh yeah.
But maybe the only thing is like the ending I thought it was a bit weak because it doesn't really tell you exactly why it happened, right? So I think they hinted at the fact that maybe it was near a nuclear station or something, but they don't really, I mean, they don't actually go out and say it. So
Right. Okay.
um,
If you hope you enjoy the rest of the ride, and then then
yeah, but it was, I think it was well done overall.
very cool.
And I don't know if Battle Royale is considered a horror film, or is it an action thriller film? Probably.
Yeah. Well, you might put it on the cusp anyway. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that was very well done. All these students trapped on an island, forced to kill each other.
Yeah.
But for American, I think for an American horror film, I think I like Cabin in the Woods the best.
Oh yes.
Josh Weldon. I mean, that was just so well written.
Yeah.
And like,
funny.
and I read about it, I was like, he only wrote it in 3 days. I'm like, damn you. Like it was just,
here, and we'll produce it sometime. And no, it ended up being very, very good. I really liked that movie.
Yeah, I was surprised. I was just like, I had low expectations going in, but I was
Mhm.
like, oh wow, this was actually pretty good. And I think I watched it 2 or 3 times. Like I was willing to,
Yeah.
go back. I don't know if you watch a lot of anime at all.
No,
So for
actually, I do.
anime, there's a series called Inuyasha about a dog demon that I think
Mhm.
is quite interesting. So the main character is, of course, a 15-year-old schoolgirl I think
Mhm.
she fell into a well or something, and then she gets transported back in time to this Sengoku period. So this is like back in ancient Japan where she meets all these demons, right? And then it's about their quest, find this piece of jewel that they broke.
Okay.
Of course, they have to save the world, blah blah blah. But that one is quite interesting because it has a lot of different types of Japanese monsters and mythologies. So that one's actually quite well done as well. But the only thing is over 100 episodes though. I think I stopped at 83 or something, and I was like, oh my god, I need to find more time. That's the thing, right? Someone says it's so long, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, if you're ready to commit.
Exactly. You have to be ready,
Give that series a go.
but a shorter one is Vampire Princess Miyu. I think that one's only 25 episodes or something.
Oh,
So
cool.
that one is about there's a space between the human world and the demon world. So these monsters come out, right? And they come into our world and they trick people. And Miyu is a vampire and she is the guardian. So she has to send all these demons back to wherever, and so she protects the humans, or like that's her job, I guess.
Right.
But it's I have to admit the animation is old, like this is done in the 90s or something, so it's not as nice as now, but the stories I think were very well done. So for example, there was one where like these schoolgirls are on a subway, right? And then they would hear crying, and they're like, why is there crying on the subway? And then it turns out there's this demon, he would lurk around, and then on the last train he'd usually pick a pretty lady. Oh, would you like to be a model? Like, I think you have such a beautiful face. And then if you go with him, you end up becoming his doll. So he sets you up in this vacated part of the subway as his doll, and you're dressed very nicely. But
Yeah, but you're a doll.
that's it. And that's it. And I was like, oh my god. So basically the whole idea is that it preys on the weaknesses of human, and
Nice.
that's why unfortunately if you're weak, then off you go with the demon, and that's it. So
So much for that. Favorite B movies, if different from what's already been discussed. Hmm?
you know what, there was one I watched a long time ago called Jesus Christ Vampire Hunter,
Uh,
but I think
I know that.
you have to be drunk to watch it.
Or
because
something. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think when you're drinking, you don't notice their lack of budget on some of the special
Or you
effects.
don't care or
Yeah,
whatever.
it's okay. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I thought that was actually. I remember I saw it at a film festival actually with a friend, and we brought like our drinks in like a brown paper bag, literally, and then we had a great time. So, but I think so. That one's about obviously Jesus Christ, who he apparently he has a struggle to protect lesbians in Ottawa from vampires,
Yeah.
and he also has a Mexican wrestler friend apparently who helps him, and that was very interesting. I think part of it is because I grew up in a Roman Catholic school system too, and I went to a all girls high school, so I'm like, oh right, this is so weird. I don't think the sisters or nuns in my school would agree with this,
Probably not. No.
but yeah, I think it was. I mean, I thought it was very creative. I
Yeah.
don't think I've seen another sort of one that's like a comedy since. I think a lot of horror movies try to be too serious, right? So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Well, and when you get into B movie territory, sometimes they're funny on purpose, sometimes they're not, sometimes they know what they are, sometimes they don't. Yeah, Jesus Christ Vampire Hunter, I think, knows. At least
yeah.
to an
Although
extent.
I was having a talk with my friend, and then she was like, "Oh, I thought Fido was a B movie because compared their budget is quite small compared to other places." And I was like, "Well, probably because Canada is much smaller
Yeah,
market." So
that's the other thing about B movies too is you can cover a wide spectrum and many different people. I've discussed this many times over actually many of these the interviews this year and years prior for the 13 horrifically silly days of Halloween about one's interpretation of what a B movie is,
mhm.
um, and it it can be confusing and everybody has their own definition, but that's okay, whatever you think is a B movie. And as far as when I talk about B movies myself, I don't mean that in an insulting way at
Yeah,
all, because B movies are fun and in their own space and they're awesome for their own reasons. It doesn't, even though some people label them bad, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad. Like, not everybody thinks
no,
that, or that bad is a bad thing, if you get me. Anyway, enough of that rant. Do you happen that now that that B movie is a Canadian B movie, right?
That's a Canadian B movie.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's pretty good. And do you have any other fave B movies from elsewhere?
Um, Not really. I don't
No,
really watch that many B movies. I have to admit.
that's okay. It's not everybody's
Yeah.
thing, but usually a person runs into at least one that can stick out in their lives for one reason or another, and that's a good one. So, last but not least, since this is the 13 horrifically silly days of Halloween, I wanted to know what your Halloween ritual is or has been, whatnot.
Well, I think it's changed. I mean, before I just, watch horror movies
Mhm.
either by myself or with one or two friends willing to go. Because
Yeah.
my husband will not watch horror movies.
Oh,
We have an understanding.
mhm.
I think by accident I took him to see Sunshine, which I thought was a science fiction, but then
Oops.
they started murdering people, and then he was like, "What the hell is this?"
Sci-fi horror, right? Like, so
It was a
it's
slash.
yeah.
So yeah. So after that, he doesn't trust my movie choice much anymore. So
Oops.
yeah. So I'll probably go out trick or treating and then
Mhm.
sit down for some horror movies by myself. So yep.
Cool, cool. Awesome. Thank you so much for speaking with me. It was great learning all about your stories and your faves too.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me.